Three people, three countries, 3 decades apart. Each woke up in the night to find something in their room that should not have been there. Each carried physical evidence the following morning, and each spent years afterward trying to understand what happened to them in the dark. Welcome to Battleground Times. Stay right here, because tonight we are going back to the source, not to the broad cultural shorthand that alien abduction stories have become, not to the television tropes and the familiar narrative arc of lights and lost time, to the actual first-hand accounts, to the specific physical details, to the marks left on bodies, to the objects moved in rooms, to the sounds heard inside skulls rather than through ears, to the things that the skeptical framework of sleep paralysis can almost explain, but keeps running into when it tries to explain all of it. If you are new here, subscribe right now. This is exactly the kind of case we exist to cover. Before the accounts themselves, there is a context worth establishing. Since the Betty and Rabarney Hill case, in 1961, alien abduction reports have been filtered through a cultural lens so thick that the original texture of these experiences has largely been lost. The retelling has standardized them: flash of light, lost time, medical examination, gray figures. The details have been repeated so many times that they have become a template, and the template has made it easier to dismiss every new account as derivative. As someone who watched too many documentaries and manufactured an experience to match, but returned to the original accounts, before the template calcified, before the cultural noise, and what you find is considerably more specific and considerably stranger than the broadcast version. People describing days of escalating wrongness before any actual encounter, a specific quality of dread, compulsive checking of locks and windows, the animal behavior of a creature that senses a predator before it can see one, auditory experiences that do not travel through the ears at all, but arrive directly inside the skull, the smell of sulfur, objects moving when nobody is near them, the specific pattern of peripheral movement that vanishes when you try to focus on it directly, poltergeist phenomena attached to abduction accounts in ways that the simple extraterrestrial visitor narrative does not account for. These are not details that make the phenomenon easier to explain. They are details that make it considerably harder, and they come from people who had, in most cases, significant professional and social incentives not to report what they experienced. The stereotype of the rural eccentric making extraordinary claims for attention does not fit most of the people who sent their accounts to us. What fits them better is the description that comes up again and again in these testimonies: a lasting sense that their safety can no longer be guaranteed, that the boundary between their private space and whatever is outside, it is thinner than they had assumed, that the vulnerability discovered during the encounter does not heal the way ordinary fear does. The 3 accounts that follow were sent to us directly. They are first-hand, they are specific, and they resist the standard dismissals in ways that are worth examining carefully. Kevin's recovered memory began not with the figures, but with the thud that woke him. He opened his eyes and found himself on his back in the dark bedroom. He could not move. The paralysis was total and immediate, the kind that does not build gradually, but is simply present the moment consciousness arrives, as though the decision about his body's mobility had been made before he woke up. At the end of the bed stood a black silhouette. No features, no texture, just a form shaped like a person occupying the space where nothing had been when he went to sleep. Kevin registered it, and then registered something else. The covers on Clara's side of the bed were swept back as if she had gotten up. She was not there, movement at the edge of his vision. Another dark form, this one to the side of the bed, shifting in a way that communicated purpose rather than randomness. Kevin tried to turn his head toward it. His head did not move. His eyes moved as far as they could in that direction and watched the second silhouette begin moving toward the bedroom door. Then he saw Clara. She was floating. Not high, just above the floor. Moving with the second figure, as though attached to it by something invisible, her body horizontal, her eyes open, her face showing that she was conscious and completely unable to do anything about what was happening to her. The look on her face was the detail that stayed with Kevin longest after the recovered memory surfaced. Not confusion. Not the disorientation of someone who does not understand what is happening. Terror with full comprehension. She knew exactly what was happening to her, and she could not stop any of it. Kevin's body began to move. Not under his control. He rolled once, twice, 3 times, until he was off the bed and on the floor, facing upward, floating just above the carpet. The figure that had been standing at the foot of the bed began to move toward him now, and as it did, he felt himself beginning to travel toward the doorway in the same horizontal floating manner as Clara before him. In the hallway, there was a third figure. The first 2 had been entirely dark, featureless, the visual equivalent of a word that has been blacked out. This one was different. It had a frame that was visible, short, a large gray, colored head. The specific quality of something more physically present than the shadow forms that had been in the bedroom. Kevin's eyes were the only part of him that he could move, and he used them as completely as he could, trying to gather information about what was in front of him. He got almost none. A short frame, the large head, and then the face was directly in front of his own, close enough to fill his entire field of vision. Looking into his eyes with an attention that felt less like examination and more like something he could not name. Then he lost consciousness. When Kevin went to the hypnotherapist, he went because of the insomnia. Because the vivid dreams of strange figures were dismantling his ability to function during the day. He was a practical man who wanted a practical solution. He was not looking for this. The therapist was not looking for this either. The concern on the therapist's face when Kevin described the content of the dreams was not performed. It was the response of a professional who recognizes something outside the normal range of what they are equipped to handle. The hypnotic regression was reluctant on Kevin's part. He did not want to go looking for something worse than the insomnia. But the insomnia had made the decision for him, and what the regression produced was not a dreamlike or symbolic narrative of the kind that hypnotherapy often surfaces. It was specific, sequential, coherent in the particular way of a memory rather than a dream, with the specific texture of something that happened rather than something imagined. Clara confirmed, independently, the mark on her stomach. She confirmed the paralysis. She did not undergo regression herself. The 2 of them did not stay together after the events of that period. Kevin does not know whether that is connected to what happened, or whether it would have ended anyway. What he knows is that the memory recovered in that hypnotherapy office has not changed in the years since. It has not softened or shifted the way dreams do. It sits in his memory, with the specific fixed quality of something real. Manny was 17 and skeptical, and found the whole thing funny until the night in the summer of 2005, when he woke up in the dark and felt something holding his wrist. His friend Emil had been describing extraterrestrial contact for as long as he had known her. Not as something extraordinary that had happened to her, as a feature of her life, a recurring element of her experience that she reported with the same matter of fact quality she brought to describing anything else. She had been in contact with these beings her entire life. They were tall, slim, white-skinned. In many cases they could pass for human, particularly the females. They were not aggressive. They simply visited. Manny found this entertaining. He was a practical teenager with a scientific bent and no particular interest in the paranormal. He listened to Amel's accounts with the affectionate skepticism of someone who enjoys a good story without believing it. One day, in the spirit of that same affectionate skepticism, he told her to pass on a message. Tell them he wanted to meet them. Tell them to come visit. He forgot about it immediately. The summer night that followed was hot, in the specific way of German summer nights, the warmth that stays in walls and floors and makes sleep shallow and restless. Manny was in his bedroom. He woke to a buzzing noise. Not external, not the kind that locates itself in the ears and traces to a source. The kind that arrives already inside the skull, sourceless, occupying the inside of the head in a way that the physical ear has no access to. He was immediately aware that he was not alone in the room. He could not see anything. He reached up to wipe his eyes and felt a pressure on his hand. Something was holding his wrist down. He did not thrash or pull against it. The moment he registered the grip, it released. He looked down. A spindly white hand was withdrawing from his wrist, moving away from him, receding into the darkness of the room with the specific, deliberate quality of something that intended to be seen leaving rather than caught staying. He turned on the lamp. The room was empty. His wrist bore no mark. There was no residual physical evidence of any kind. Just his bedroom and the hot summer darkness outside, and the completely certain knowledge that something with a white hand and long fingers had been holding his wrist in the dark a few seconds before. This happened twice more. The same quality of encounter each time. The buzzing in the head. The awareness of presence before any visual evidence. The brief physical contact. The withdrawal. The empty room. After the third time, Manny went to Amel and told her to pass the message back. He did not want to meet them anymore. He would appreciate it if she would ask them to stop. She did. And they did. This is the part of Manny's account that the skeptical framework finds most difficult. Sleep paralysis can account for the buzzing sound and the sense of presence. It can account for the peripheral awareness of forms in the dark. It cannot easily account for the voluntary cessation of the encounters following a specific verbal request made to a third party. Sleep paralysis is a physiological event. It does not respond to requests communicated through intermediaries. If what Manny experienced was a recurring physiological phenomenon, it should have continued regardless of what he said to Amel. If it stopped because of what he said to Amel, then something heard him say it. What that something was, and what it means that Amel apparently had the means to communicate with it on his behalf, are questions that Manny has sat with for 20 years without arriving at answers he finds satisfying. He remains neither a believer in the conventional extraterrestrial sense, nor a dismissive skeptic. He is someone who had a specific experience that specific actions brought to an end, and that he has been unable to fully explain since. The three accounts in this episode share certain qualities that are worth noting across their differences. Physical evidence that survives the waking moment. The specific pattern of escalating environmental wrongness before the central encounter. Internal sounds that do not exist in the acoustic environment. Brief physical contact that leaves a mark or a sensation. And in each case, the specific quality of an encounter that was not invited, was not manufactured by prior cultural exposure, and left the person who experienced it permanently changed in their assessment of what their private space actually is. The sleep paralysis explanation is the one that mainstream science reaches for first when these accounts are presented. And it is not a weak explanation. Sleep paralysis is a documented physiological phenomenon with a well-understood mechanism. The brain waking from REM sleep before the body's motor inhibition systems have disengaged. The result is consciousness trapped in an immobile body, and in that state the brain generates experiences that have a specific and consistent character across cultures and across history. A sense of presence, a weight on the chest, figures at the edges of vision or at the foot of the bed, an atmosphere of dread that has no specific object. The consistency of sleep paralysis experiences across different people in different cultures in different centuries is itself significant. The old hag of Newfoundland folklore, the nightmare of medieval Europe, the incubus and succubus of religious tradition, the gray alien of contemporary Western culture, all of them sharing the fundamental features of the sleep paralysis experience with the specific cultural dress of their era. This is a coherent and serious argument, and it deserves to be engaged with on its own terms rather than dismissed. But the sleep paralysis framework has edges where it runs out. It accounts well for the paralysis. It accounts for the sense of presence and the visual hallucinations. It accounts for the weight and the dread. It does not account cleanly for the physical evidence that persists after the waking moment. The triangular mark on Joe's back, the mark on Clara's stomach, the moved television in Joe's room, the pentagon formations of the sofa cushions in Kevin and Clara's house. Sleep paralysis does not move televisions. It does not rearrange cushions. The brain in that state is generating internal experiences. It is not reaching into the physical environment and leaving marks on skin or rotating furniture on a chest of drawers. The psychological explanation suggests that the marks are manufactured by the body itself, psychosomatic responses to the intensity of the hallucinated experience. This is not an absurd argument. The documented phenomenon of stigmata demonstrates that the human body is capable under certain psychological conditions of producing physical marks that correspond to believed experiences. A person who believes with absolute conviction that they have been physically marked by an entity may, in certain circumstances, generate that mark through the body's own mechanisms. But the cushions in pentagon formations on the floor are not psychosomatic. The television rotated to a new position is not a psychosomatic phenomenon. These are changes in the physical environment that are either explained by external agency or are not explained. The people who experienced them had no motivation to manufacture them. They were not building a case for public consumption. They were trying to understand what was happening in their own homes. The most challenging element across all three accounts is the one that the psychological framework has least to say about. The internal sounds, the buzzing, beeping, metallic noises that multiple witnesses describe as arriving inside the skull rather than through the ears. In Joe's case, in Kevin's case, in Manny's case, these sounds preceded the encounter. In Kevin and Clara's case, both of them heard the same internal sound simultaneously, while their dogs, with their superior hearing, registered nothing. If the sounds were acoustic phenomena occurring in the room, the dogs would have responded. They did not respond because the sounds were not in the room. They were inside two human skulls at the same time. This is the detail that requires the most careful thinking. Either two people independently hallucinated the same sound at the same moment, which the sleep paralysis framework would need to stretch considerably to account for, or something produced a signal that two specific nervous systems received and two other nervous systems, the dogs, did not. The targeting of that signal is the element that most resists the existing explanatory frameworks. If the beings in these accounts are not from space, what are they from? This is the question that the conventional extraterrestrial framework closes off by providing an answer. They are visitors from another planet. They come here to study us. The medical examinations, the sampling, the specific focus on human biology, these are the activities of scientists from an advanced civilization conducting research on a less developed one. This explanation organizes the available details into a coherent narrative, and the coherence of the narrative has allowed it to become the dominant frame for these experiences. But the details resist it at the edges. The smell of sulfur that multiple witnesses report is not a detail that the extraterrestrial framework accommodates easily. Sulfur has a specific cultural history. It is the smell of the demonic in a tradition that predates the modern UFO era by centuries. It is not a detail that someone constructing an alien encounter narrative would typically include. It is the kind of detail that arrives uninvited from the experience itself and sits awkwardly alongside the otherwise technological vocabulary of the encounters. The accounts of abduction experiences ending immediately when the name of Christ is invoked are more difficult still. These are not isolated reports from religiously motivated witnesses looking for a theological interpretation. They appear across a range of accounts from people with varying degrees of religious belief. The intervention works, according to those who report it, regardless of the sincerity of the invocation, and it produces an immediate cessation of the encounter that nothing else has been reported to produce with comparable reliability. These details point toward something that the interdimensional hypothesis tries to account for. The beings in these encounters may not be physical entities from another planet who travel here through space. They may be something closer to what the medieval framework called demons. Entities from a different order of reality, one that has always existed alongside human reality, that interacts with human consciousness rather than human biology, and that has been described in different cultural vocabularies across different historical periods without ever being definitively identified or understood. The physical marks, the moved objects, the internal sounds, the poltergeist phenomena preceding encounters. These details fit the interdimensional model better than they fit the extraterrestrial model. A physical entity arriving in a spacecraft would leave specific physical evidence of a different kind. What these encounters leave behind is precisely the kind of evidence that an entity interacting primarily with consciousness would produce. Marks generated by the body's own response to a believed experience. Objects moved by means that leave no mechanical evidence. Sounds delivered directly to the nervous system. An experience that is entirely convincing and entirely resistant to documentation. The experiment in which a hypnotic suggestion unlocked what the subject described as a complete abduction experience adds a dimension that neither the extraterrestrial nor the sleep paralysis frameworks can fully absorb. If a brief suggestion under hypnosis can apparently open a channel to an experience that the subject then develops independently and subsequently cannot be convinced was implanted, then the mechanism may not be in the entities at all. It may be in the human mind itself. The hypnotist may have accidentally provided access to something that was already accessible. Something that waits at the edges of certain states of consciousness and enters when the door is left open. If that is the case, then the beings are not coming to find us. They have always been here. in the space between waking and sleep, in the dark at the edge of peripheral vision, in the internal acoustic space of a skull, at 3 in the morning in a student bedroom in Bristol, a suburban house in Wisconsin, a summer bedroom in Germany, waiting for the moment when the barrier between whatever they are and whatever we are becomes thin enough to cross. This is the possibility that the conventional frameworks most resist. Because if the entities are not extraterrestrial, they are not addressable through the framework that has been built to address them. You cannot make contact with something that is already in contact. You cannot track something that has no origin in physical space. You cannot prove something that operates primarily in consciousness. You can only encounter it in the dark and try to understand afterward what it wanted from you. And whether it will come back, drop your theory in the comments right now. Do you believe these accounts? Is it sleep paralysis all the way down? Is it extraterrestrial? Is it something from a different order of reality entirely? What do you make of the fire warning that saved a plane? What do you make of the sulfur smell? We read every comment and we respond to every one. Share this tonight because these are first-hand accounts that deserve to be heard. And subscribe now because the next case is already coming. The Planet Weird experiment did not set out to prove anything about alien abductions. It set out to test a much simpler proposition. Could hypnosis alone, without any prior belief or cultural priming, generate an abduction experience in a skeptic? The subject was selected specifically because he did not believe, not a wavering agnostic on the question, an active skeptic, someone whose prior position on alien abduction accounts was that they were the product of sleep disorders, cultural suggestion, and the human tendency to manufacture narratives around unusual experiences. He went into the session with the specific confidence of someone who expects to emerge from it having demonstrated that the mechanism behind abduction memories is hypnotic suggestion rather than actual experience. The hypnotist kept the suggestion minimal, the subject lying in bed, a light at the window, a small figure appearing in the room. That was the entirety of the planted scenario. No examination, no craft, no medical procedures, no lost time. Just a light and a figure and the instruction to notice them. When the subject came out of the trance, he reported a complete and detailed abduction experience, not the brief scene that had been suggested, an entire subsequent narrative being taken, a craft, examination procedures, the specific quality of an experience that felt entirely real and entirely sequential. He had taken the two planted details and built an entire architecture around them that he had not been given and that the hypnotist had not suggested. More significant still was what happened after he was told. The hypnotist explained clearly and directly that the experience had been constructed, that the memory of the light and the figure had been implanted as a deliberate test of hypnotic suggestibility, that everything the subject believed he had experienced was the result of that suggestion interacting with his own unconscious processes. The subject acknowledged this information. He understood it intellectually. And he remained completely convinced that the experience was real. This is the detail that the sleep paralysis framework and the cultural suggestion framework both struggle with. A person who knows that a memory was implanted and who continues to experience it as genuine is not responding to sleep paralysis. They are not responding to cultural priming. They are responding to something that the hypnotic state apparently made accessible, and that the conscious mind, even when informed of the mechanism, cannot subsequently override. The hypnotist described the session afterward as feeling like accidentally opening a door. The suggestion had not created the experience. It had provided access to something that was already there, waiting for a certain kind of permission to enter. The subject had not manufactured an abduction experience from cultural fragments. He had accessed something that presented itself to him as memory rather than imagination, and that his mind categorized as real experience, regardless of what he was subsequently told about its origin. This raises a question that neither the believers nor the skeptics have been comfortable sitting with. What if the mechanism of abduction is not in the entities at all? What if it is in the human mind itself? A capacity that most people never activate. That certain physiological states make accessible, that hypnosis can apparently unlock deliberately, and that once opened presents experiences so fully formed and so convincing that the mind cannot subsequently distinguish them from events that happened in the physical world. If that capacity exists, then the entity on the other side of the door is not something that travels to us from elsewhere. It is something that has always had access to us from inside, something that waits in the architecture of human consciousness for the specific conditions that allow it through. Sleep. The hypnagogic state. The particular neurological configuration of sleep paralysis. The accidental permission of a hypnotic suggestion made by someone who did not know what they were unlocking. And if that is what it is, then the question of where it comes from is less important than the question of what it wants. Because whatever it is, it has been getting in for a very long time. What the accounts in this episode share, beneath their differences of location and decade and circumstance, is a specific kind of aftermath, not the dramatic aftermath of crisis or breakdown, though some of those who report these experiences do eventually reach those states. The quieter aftermath, the permanent recalibration of what safety means, the specific way that a person who has woken in the night to find something in their room that should not be there relates to the transition between wakefulness and sleep from that point onward. The boundary that most people cross without thinking, surrendering consciousness to the dark without registering it as an act of trust, becomes visible, becomes a thing they are aware of, becomes something they approach differently. Joe went back to his student bedroom in Bristol and slept in the room with the television that had been rotated. He completed his degree. He built an adult life. He has never experienced sleep paralysis before or since, which removes the most available conventional explanation for his encounter. The mark on his back faded. The television stayed in the position it had moved to. What did not fade was the specific knowledge that something had been in that room with him, and that he had been entirely unable to prevent it. Kevin and Clara did not stay together after the events of that period. Whether that is connected or coincidental, Kevin cannot say with certainty. What he can say is that the memory recovered in the hypnotherapy session has not changed or softened in the years since. It has the specific fixed quality of genuine memory rather than the shifting quality of dream. Clara confirmed the mark on her stomach. She confirmed the paralysis. The two of them had the same experience in the same room on the same night, and neither of them has a satisfying explanation for what it was. Manny took the most direct action available to him. He told Emil to pass the message back. He did not want to meet them anymore. The encounters stopped. This is the detail in Manny's account that most resists the conventional frameworks. If what he experienced was a physiological phenomenon, a recurring episode of hypnagogic hallucination triggered by the specific conditions of summer heat and light sleep, it would not have responded to a verbal request communicated through a third party. Physiological phenomena do not receive messages and change their behavior accordingly. Whatever stopped visiting Manny after he asked it to stop was something that could hear. Across all three accounts, and across the broader landscape of abduction reports that the transcript references, there is a consistent element that the mainstream debate about these experiences tends to minimize. The witnesses are not, in most cases, people who wanted this. They did not go looking for contact. They did not attend hypnosis sessions hoping to recover alien abduction memories. They were sleeping in their bedrooms. They were going about their ordinary lives in their ordinary homes. The encounters arrived uninvited and left marks, physical and psychological, that the witnesses carried afterward without asking for them. The demand for proof in these cases always falls on the witnesses. Where is the physical evidence? Why can't these claims be verified? Why does every abduction account exist in a space that resists documentation? These are reasonable questions, and they deserve reasonable engagement. But they carry an assumption that the entities in these accounts, whatever they are, operate under the same constraints as physical objects in the physical world, that they leave the same kinds of evidence, that the tools we use to document physical events are the right tools for documenting encounters that may not be physical events at all, if the beings are interdimensional rather than extraterrestrial, if they interact with consciousness rather than biology, if the marks on Joe's back and Clara's stomach are psychosomatic responses to believed experiences rather than surgical incisions, if the moved television and the Pentagon cushions were moved by something that left no fingerprints and no mechanism. Then the absence of conventional physical evidence is not an argument against the encounters. It is a feature of what the encounters are. The question of proof is the wrong question because it assumes a physical event that can be proven or disproven. What these accounts describe may be something that exists in a category where proof, as we understand, it is simply not available. That is either the most disturbing implication of these accounts or the most reassuring one, depending on your perspective. Disturbing because it means these encounters cannot be prevented, documented, or stopped by any mechanism currently available to us. Reassuring because it means that whatever these things are, they have been visiting human beings for as long as human beings have been sleeping in the dark, and most of those human beings have survived the encounter and continued their lives. Manny told them to stop, and they stopped. The crew of Flight 401 came back to protect their airline, and then, when the last piece of the wreckage was destroyed, they left. Torres pressed his hand against the glass and said, "Please. Whatever visits us in the night has its own purposes and its own limits and its own relationship to the specific vulnerability of human sleep that we have been trying to understand since the first person woke in the dark and found something standing at the foot of their bed. We have not understood it yet, but we have been keeping the record, and the record is longer than most people know. Subscribe now if you have not already. Hit the bell because the next case is already coming. And drop your theory in the comments because this is the kind of question that belongs to everyone who has ever woken in the night and been certain they were not alone.